Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Watch from Home Theater, our little live streaming corner of the internet where we still get to watch movies together even though we are apart. I'm Clint Gage, and tonight we're watching Netflix's Extraction. And we got some very special guests with us, including producer and star of Extraction, Chris Hemsworth, will be joining us a little bit later. But before we get to that, let's get some business out of the way first. We will be playing a handful of the clips right here in the stream. We got several cool scenes that we'll be able to share here during the show, but we don't have the whole movie. So if you want to sync up with us, take a second to get your Netflixes all queued up. Right to the black screen just before the Netflix logo comes up, because that's where we will be starting the movie here in a minute. And if you don't have a Netflix account but still want to get synced up with us, you can hustle over to Netflix and start a free trial. There are links in the description wherever you happen to be watching this. Links in the description to help you out with that. So while you guys take care of all that, get yourself synced up, let me introduce our first two guests tonight, director Sam Hargrave and screenwriter and producer Joe Russo. Guys, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
You bet. So how's everything going? How have you been enjoying the release of the movie so far?
Well, I mean, it's, first off, thank you to all the people who are watching it. We really appreciate the response. It's been, very positive. So it makes you proud as a filmmaker, and I'm just happy people are enjoying it, and we can provide some entertainment during these.
Yeah, same. I mean, this is something that Sam and I have been working on for well over 2 years now, and this was a labor of love, an homage to action films of old, and we're glad that people are responding to it.
Yeah. Now, Joe, this is an idea that you and your brother have had for a long time, and you developed the graphic novel version of it as well. What was it about this story that had you continue to push for it for a long time?
Well, I love a sort of edge of your seat, forget to eat your popcorn action thriller, and I feel like it's an endangered species right now in Hollywood. These sort of sub 100 movies, they don't exist theatrically really anymore, and I think thank God for Netflix that there's a home. And there's a way to access millions of people to tell your stories to. And they were, and they're incredibly creatively supportive, financially supportive. And, so this was an idea we came up with about, well over a decade ago. I think it was after I had seen, I read a book about a kidnapping in South America, and it was so harrowing, and the level of detail was so specific, stuck in my head for months. And then I glommed onto this notion of a character with emotional trauma who was tasked with extracting a kidnapped victim, and then started building a story around it. And then it was something that we just played around with for years, initially as a vehicle for us to direct coming off of Community. But then we went into Marvel and, spent a good 8 years there. And it's where we met Sam and fostered an amazing creative relationship. And now here we are.
Cool. And Sam, I want to talk real quick about your sort of goals for this film. Like, in terms of the action movie genre, like big picture, and this being your first feature film, what was the most exciting part of this process for you? The most intriguing part?
Well, like Joe said, it's kind of an homage to the action films of old, like that I grew up watching in the 80s and 90s. That there's not really a space for them nowadays. So when I read the script that Joe wrote, it was a page turner. It had heart. It had a template for incredible action, and I thought those are all things that I looked for in a project that I want to direct. So it seemed like a perfect fit. And then on top of that, to get to work, Joe and Anthony, who were mentors of mine and close friends, and Chris was, it's kind of hard to say no to such a wonderful opportunity, because we spend so much time on a film set. Like Joe said, it'll be 2 years, or has been 2 years working on this film. So you want to surround yourself with people that you know and trust and respect and have a good relationship with. And I feel like, that relationship exists between me and, the Russo brothers and Hemsworth. So it was a dream come true for me. Just a lot of.
Cool. And Joe, just one more question before we get going. Is that a Lord of the Rings pinball machine behind you?
It is. This is my we're in my theater where I have a Lord of the Rings pinball machine, and then I have a time machine. 3,000 games, I think, in it. My prized possession being a Dragon's Lair and Space Ace game mode on it. So
nice.
What do you got behind you there?
This is a Centipede machine. That's the only game that it's got, but it still works. It's the 1982 cabinet, I think, with had to scrape a little graffiti off the side from where I picked it up from. But I've got 2 small kids, so I'm spending most of my quarantine stuck in a corner of the garage working from home. But and then Sam, I have to ask about your background there a little bit too. Is that a SAG award over your shoulder there?
It is. That this right here, outstanding action performance by a stunt ensemble for Endgame. I thought that's kind of fitting, seeing as the director of Endgame is right there. We put that in a more prominent place.
Yes, scoot it in just a little bit.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
that's cool. All right, well, I tell you what, let's just get into this movie. If you guys are at home or not queued up to it already, over on Netflix, here's your last chance. So spend a second to get set up over there. Also, want to remind everybody, wherever you're watching this stream, make sure that you leave comments or questions that you have for Joe and Sam, also for Chris when he is going to be joining us here in a few minutes. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag WFHTheater, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can as we go through the film. But I think that's probably enough from me. So let's get into this movie if we're ready. Let's everybody get ready to click play in 3, 2, 1, play. Traditionally on the show, my first question is, what's your favorite studio logo?
That's a good question.
Depends on which movie we're watching, right?
The 20th Century logo. It's too much emotional baggage with that logo for it not to be my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I love that one, and I mean, the MGM, like the classic, the lion, like always, I don't know, just invokes something epic is coming. You got a Bond movie or that was always classic for me.
What about yours?
One of my first jobs when I moved to LA, I spent a lot of time working on the Fox lot, so it's the Fox 20th Century Fox fanfare for me. Feels like home.
That snare is Pavlovian.
Yeah.
All right.
So we talk about quickly about the setting of this movie in Dhaka. It's such an unfamiliar kind of place, I think.
Yeah, I mean that was Joe's. I think one of one of the brilliant things about the script was, this story taking place in a part of the world that most Western audiences have no clue existed. So to bring that to life was.
Yeah, it was originally it was based on a graphic novel that we had written. So when we came up with the idea, we converted it into a graphic novel a decade ago called Ciudad. And it was originally set in Ciudad del Este, and then there were some other projects circling that as a location, so it started feeling less interesting to us. And we'd spent a lot of time on the road promoting the Marvel films, spent some time in India, absolutely, and felt like it was I just was there promoting the movie and going, I just don't see this in Western films that much, and it's a shame. So we came up with the idea to relocate it to Bangladesh and India.
Now, opening the movie on this bridge scene, was it always that way? Like in the script, did the movie always open on Tyler on the bridge?
We restructured it in editorial. There was it was originally scripted to open on the scene, the extraction scene in the room where they're holding Ovi, and then it went backwards in time, and then you caught back up to that moment. And we thought it would be better to open on a seminal moment for Hemsworth, a psychological moment for him. and to add more tension about whether he's actually going to survive the movie or not.
I love these little quiet kind of slice of teenage life vignettes that happen here.
Yeah, this was important to the story to just show the loud, and real fast, real quick. So to show the quieter side of the character and the juxtaposition, the life he's living, trying to be a normal teenage kid, but having a father who's doing the nefarious things that he did. He's very isolated, and so we tried to tell that in the the environment here of the house, and just like how cold and calculated it all was.
And we'll talk plenty about Saju moving forward, but this is a character that I found really fascinating in the movie.
We like complicated characters. I mean,
Yeah.
he's look at Thanos in Infinity War. Every villain thinks they're the hero of their own story. Every hero is a villain in someone else's story. So it's not. One of the things that's most interesting to us to explore is complicated motives and characters. This is a guy who generally, beyond the fact that he is a hitman for a drug dealer, cares about his family and has his own sort of desires in life and things that he loves and cares for. And he's put in a terrible situation, and then he makes folds to do what he believes is right in the situation, and it's going to cost him his life. Sam, do you want to talk a little bit about your relationship with Tom Siegel?
Yeah, I mean the beauty. I mean, part of the thing to me is so much fun about this movie is the look. And I mean, to me, incredible advantage of the space that we were in, the way he used light and lenses to develop, this world as a character, and that we talked a lot about the differentiation between the worlds and how the world of Ovi and Amir was a little bit more smooth. So you'll see more dolly shots or locked on, where things were a little more. As we get to Dhaka, as soon as things kind of set off, the world becomes a little more unstable for everybody involved. So we went to a handheld feel. But the idea was always to make it look and feel like you were there. Not say documentary style per se, but you wanted to be able to taste, the sweat and like feel the grit in the environment. Tom is, I mean, in the last 15, 20 years, one of the best cinematographers on the planet. To get to work with a guy like that, I mean, I was learning stuff every day from. I will be forever grateful that he was, leading the way.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of you actually having a camera in your hands throughout the production too. Like, what was that like working with a guy like Tom Siegel, and then also running camera for him?
It's tough because that guy, he's an amazing camera operator himself. He started in documentaries, like he was in wartime and like conflicts in South America and all over the world. So he's been in hot spots. So it was, he really wanted to do a lot of those things, and in his heyday, no problem. He would have done what I did, times 10. But he was very gracious to allow me, the young, hungry, crazy director, to jump in there and try my hand at capturing some of these things in a way that I had talked to him about and wanted to try my hand at, just to capture the action and in the spirit of what I had in my mind. And he was very gracious to allow me.
So here we already have a bunch of questions already coming in, and the one we're getting the most of, which is one I'm sure you've gotten before, but B127 is a user on IG and YouTube. Kyle Steves is watching as well. A handful of people have this question for you, Sam. But what did you think of your first directing experience? I mean, you're kind of touching on being able to work with Tom there as being a highlight of it. But what did you think of your first directing experience, and what have you learned directing this movie, and just making the transition into being a director? B127 also, I should point out, mentions, much love to you guys and thank you for everything you've done at Marvel. Pass that along from B127, who's watching on YouTube as well.
Great. Our pleasure bringing the Marvel Universe alive, or at least the small part that I had in it. But as a director, I mean, it's funny. I think the most surprising thing, and Joe, you have had a similar experience or not, but for me, the biggest shift was the sheer volume of questions that I would be asked throughout a day. And it was almost mind-blowing, just the amount of, you understand there's a lot of departments, there's a lot of people that need to know what's going on, but just when it happens all at once, you're like, wow, this is a lot. And you're like a switchboard operator. You're in the middle of a dramatic scene, and as soon as you break, you gotta, like, someone says, hey, how many holes do you want on which side of this red car for a scene 2 weeks from now? And you gotta unplug from that dramatic scene and put special effects technical brain and help all to help you make a movie. At any time, if I would get frustrated or like, too many questions, you're like, well, you don't have to answer them, but it's your movie. If you don't, I can't do my job. That was one thing that was very kind of but then I think, just to reiterate the importance to me of surrounding yourself with people who are better and smarter than you, because if you're the smartest, most talented person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And I was very fortunate to be in a room with a lot of super talented smart people, and I learned something every day from someone, whether it was Joe or Tom or Chris. Like, I was very fortunate, an amazing crew and cast.
So here we've got
advice to always give new directors is, be decisive. You just have to you just have to make a decision, and you will answer thousands of questions. I always say, make a decision, and then if you find out later it's the wrong decision, then you have to adapt and pivot and figure out how to turn it into the right decision. But make the decision.
So one of the things about this sequence, so we're right now we're meeting Tyler Rake right here underwater, and one of the things that struck me about this, we sort of touched on Saju earlier, is we get a lot of detail about Saju's backstory before we get any about Tyler's. Tyler's introduction is mostly mood and tone, and not a lot of details. Can you talk about playing it that way, with sort of the movie's more antagonist getting a more detailed setup?
Joe, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. The that was intentional, is just to have a more mysterious lead. He clearly is haunted by something. It doesn't take much. This is a language that the audience understands very well. They've seen thousands of action, and so we felt like the real estate was required for us to take Saju on a journey that was a believable journey for you, and that requires screen time to do that. So we're slightly inverting the amount of time you would spend on a hero versus a villain, because he's going to go from an antagonist to a protagonist, and he needs a setup and story to do that. Tyler doesn't need that same amount of setup. He's damaged. He's an extractor, and he's offered a gig. It's a fairly, and it's Chris Hemsworth. So you get mileage out of Chris's a charm and charisma on screen. So you don't have to do a ton of work on his, making you fall in love with the character. You're going to fall in love with Chris. So, but it was intentionally structured that way to have a more satisfying arc for Saju in the film.
Proof of life as of 6 hours ago.
It's also great, even just down to the wardrobe here. I like how out of place Nick is in this. I mean, she's stands way out in um, in Tyler's world.
Yeah, I mean, the idea here was that it's almost that Rake, a damaged man, his kind of retreating from his job, his past, and he's gone off, and she's kind of representing the world he used to be a part of, and it's out of place with where he is right now. When we meet him, he's not in that place. That's not something he wants to be doing. So she represents that, the old world, and the stark contrast of like how she's dressed and her demeanor, and she comes in on a shiny helicopter. There's money, there's intrigue, all the stuff that was that world, but he has left that behind, before because of his past, and now she's enticing him back into it. But no, kind of knowing where he comes from and his damage, so she appeals to that here.
Here we got a pretty a detailed question here from Melanie Macklin, who's watching on IGN's YouTube channel. Were there any significance to the tattoos that Tyler wears?
Yeah, actually, if you see, we were trying to go for a very different look for Chris. He wanted to play a character unlike anything he'd ever done before. And so part of that was he's such a handsome guy. It's unavoidably, he's devilishly. So how do we kind of change people's perspective of him slightly? So we're going to, more, hard line haircut, put some tattoos on him. But the three on the neck, or the three, arrow tips or spear, were just kind of his approach to life, and his mission. He's always he's the tip of the spear. He's piercing the situation and going forward with it. The interesting, and how I'm trying to think of how much we see him, but we do it a couple times, is on his forearms. He's got some tattoos that are actually, which represent his kids drew, and we so we use that to tie into his Tyler Rake from Hemsworth's actual real life, but that his kid, those are significant because those came from his son in this. So we tried to feature those at different times, and those are details that we never reference. It's just a visual reference thing for us to add layers for the at times like this you can reference and go back, and people will hopefully.
How many hostiles on site?
Maybe 20. Okay, clock is ticking. Let's chop.
This is a great scene. This is sort of some of the action movie shorthand that you were kind of talking about earlier. But here's the exposition. We need it for like 30 seconds, and we're off. Which I think it's great.
You want to be efficient. You want to move the audience through it. This is a throwback film, and so it does borrow from language that you're familiar with, and so where the novelty comes in the movie, I think, is in the the characters that circle around Tyler, Saju, as you mentioned, Ovi, Nick. These are less traditional character representations in these kinds of films, and I think where the novelty comes from in execution.
Yeah, this actually was one of my favorite that we shot on, and to give away too much, but the beauty of that's one of I've had people from the region of India, Bangladesh say like how wonderfully real it looks, but we shot that in a back alleyway of old Chinatown in Thailand, and so because that was something additional we wanted to bring to the story. We added on, so we didn't have the access to the same locations before, so we just had to make do. But the art department, like our Phil Ivey, our production designer, and then Nathan, like our art director, they absolutely crushed that scene. Like, it was those kinds of things in movies I love, where you walk in a door in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and you exit. Now nobody knows the difference. That kind of stuff I love about.
And the intent is to be a muscular action film. It is about a simple premise, right? There's emotional trauma to the lead, which is some curvature that makes him interesting as the movie progresses. The setting is unique, and as I said, the supporting characters have, especially Saju has a non-traditional arc. If you were to dissect the movie, Nick actually executes the sort of most critical moments in the film, killing the sniper, bringing down the chopper, assassinating Amir Asif at the end of the movie. So there are some non-traditional moments that you can play with, but the point of the movie, the exercise, was a muscular, simple drive to the film that would allow for some virtuoso action work, which Sam delivered on in spades.
Yeah, I will say one of the things that really struck me about the movie is how much it covers. Like it does a lot. There's a handful of characters that have really like thorough arcs in not a very long runtimes.
It's just efficiency of storytelling. It really is trying to be very thoughtful and compressed. What I love is not forgetting to eat your popcorn. I like those edge of your seat, ticking clock. Ronin is another favorite of mine, with De Niro, Frankenheimer. Just a really tightly a tight compressed time frame, without knowing too much about the characters. You go back and look at Ronin. I believe that's a Mammoth script, and it is exceedingly efficient in terms of character. There's not a ton that you know about De Niro in that movie. And it's the exercise of watching him as a likable, charismatic lead try to survive the plot. It's the same exercise we're indulging here.
So this is one of the first enormous fight scene in this movie here. Just talk about walking in. How do you even approach just one guy walking into a room and needs to take out everybody? This is how do you even start to approach that? There's like a dozen guys that one guy needs to take out.
Yeah. Well, truthfully, we started off Joe's script, and the action description on the page was incredibly, character driven and efficient in telling a story. And all we tried to do, was a story and find inventive, creative ways to do that. Part of the challenge with all this, how do you make something like this believable? And the beauty of it is, you're doing fights with multiple attackers, is you've got someone as big and strong and aggressive as Chris Hemsworth, and so you buy that he could make it through this group. But we wanted to push him and just keep it constant. Like the pressure was always on, where he didn't get a chance to breathe. So as soon as he gets a win, somebody else is right on top of him, and you're just really forcing him to think. And and also for us as action designers, try to sneak in some little details like this one coming up here, and boom, how's your neck? That's actually little things like that, because we wanted to do that to a stunt guy, but you'd only get one take, and I like my guys, so we did that with a dummy.
That was a dummy, the guy that got flipped over on top of his head.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then here comes the murder by rake, which is the we are the people who brought you Arrested Development community. We have a sense of humor about everything we do. We knew this exercise was a throwback. The name is a throwback. A lot of what we do, my brother and I, you'll notice we talk about films from our childhood and things that were really resonant with us. We're just film junkies who love movies, and this was trying to recapture the feeling I had when I was 12 or 14 watching a movie like this. John Rambo, Tyler Rake, right? Like we're being self-aware and tongue-in-cheek at the same time as we're trying to commit to the exercise as realistically as possible, make the characters function in a way that seems psychologically real. This is a hyper-adrenalized story. We know that, we're aware of it, but we want to have fun with it. We want to really commit to the exercise at the same time. Let you know that we're self-aware of its its roots and its how it functions as an homage.
Well, so after that scene, seeing him just take everybody out like that. Here's a question that we've seen a couple of times come in already. Here's for one of them is Gar Drago, who's watching on IGN's YouTube. How different was it to work with Chris on something like this with such heavy context and obviously the violence is way amped up versus something like the MCU movies?
From a directorial standpoint, I mean, I know Chris, we talked about it. He was wanting to do something that was more grounded, more real, and that had kind of an R rating to allow him to do some things that he hadn't gotten to do in the Thor universe, or in the Marvel universe as Thor. He's a super talented guy, and I've worked with him, on those movies. For me, because it's such a, he's a god in those, and I think Joe and Anthony did a good job of him as much as possible, but he's still a god. To make him human in this, and where he feels pain, but also gets to dish out some pain. It was a really fun challenge, and I wanted to push him physically because I knew he had it in him, and he delivered. I mean, talk about like reading this on the page. Talk about an introduction to a villain. Like it doesn't get a whole lot more villainous and cold than this action right here. Which we got a little cameo from our favorite little chipmunk.
Yeah,
that was a happy accident. You're on the set all day, and he just wouldn't take no for an answer. His agents were just on us nonstop. Anyway, we were in between
takes. You got a bump for that, right?
And yeah. he got bumped up to a day.
But this is, I mean, just chucking a kid off a roof is some of the gnarliest stuff I've seen in a movie. Like it's
intense, and it's meant to be intense, and it's meant to illustrate. I think there's an epidemic of sociopathy in the world right now. It's part of the issue we're struggling with as a society, and that sociopathy runs the ranks from criminality through to technology, through to politics, and this character is a pure sociopath. And what's interesting is that character like Rake or Saju exists in the same world with the sociopath. They have violent tendencies. They are trained to kill people, but ultimately you see that that neither of them end up being completely sociopathic like Amir does. And that's what the story is sort of in a world of gray to darkness. There are a few characters who can hopefully rise above. They're individuals who can rise above a very dark world to do something noble.
Well, I think we actually have. I'm getting a thumbs up from the TD. I think we actually have Chris if we're ready to bring him in. Just segueing straight from talking about the sociopaths in the movies. Let's bring Chris on if we have. Yeah. We're working on it. But I do like this while we're waiting on him to come in. I do really like this scene. It's got some these group of kids have some real City of God vibes to them too, which feels like one of the other movies that it's got some DNA in here.
Yeah, without question, that's one of my favorite films, City of God. And I think it's interesting to track the ascendancy of a criminal. How does a boy, what kind of boy was Amir before he became who he is? And watching how these boys are then scarred and put in a position where they have no choice but to become killers and criminals.
This scene actually. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No. You're the one we're here for.
This was. Yeah, well, this is our first day of shooting. I remember this, being that for me like a very important scene because it's the first time you see these two start. but it was very, very important. But so to do that early on in the schedule was daunting. I was again fortunate to have two really great actors who brought and said so much without saying a word in these moments. That really starts the development between these two characters. It's gonna lead you on and make you care throughout the rest of the film. And this is kind of where it starts. This is a super important scene and yeah, daunting to do early.
Yeah. Well, and it's really understated too. Like I really enjoy how I mean, we keep talking a lot about efficiency and everything. Like there's no nonsense, no wasted anything in this interaction here, which I think is really telling for Rake as a character too.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, you want to see the kid and what he's going through some time, but you also we're tracking this with Rake. You want to see how at this moment he's all business. The kid is just kind of the package that they talk about later. He needs to be delivered. He's he's an object that must be taken from X to to Y, and he's going to do that. And whatever gets in his way, he's going to take it out. So it's very important to the arc of Tyler's story to establish his viewpoint of and to set that up. So you see his change later on in.
Mahajan, 21st of January 2005.
Proceeding to extraction.
And I just love this location. I mean, there's it's such a visually that right there is visually stunning, and there's these buildings that we found that were just beautiful and said something about that that interaction in that world that we really loved. Tom.
And here again, I have to comment again on the wardrobe for those for Nick and for the other guy there. Like there's something so fun and couture about it that's just so different from everybody else in the movie.
Yeah.
The psychology behind that is that look, they're like agents, right? They're very wealthy arms dealers / reps for mercenaries, and they're stylish. They do quite well for themselves, and they dress themselves in a way to, like I said, elevate themselves above the sort of messy careers that they've chosen.
And Sam, we missed talking about it in your first couple appearances actually, but this is you. There you are, you're sniping.
Yep, that's me coming in to help the team accomplish the goal, and then it's maybe that'll be my thing. Joe and I laughed about it, is like Hitchcock. You put yourself in your movies. It comes first act of all my movies. Just set it up and be like, and you're done. Just think of creative ways that I can kill myself. And subsequent.
It gets worse and worse in every movie. You're the drummer from Spinal Tap.
Yeah, exactly.
Good luck figuring out how to work choking on vomit into one of your movies.
Hey, never underestimate the creative minds of Joe Russo and Anthony Russo. Right now, I mean that shot always to me just stands out as Tom Siegel, the brilliance of his backlight. We were always chasing backlight, just hammered into me, and for good reason, because it really does make this movie beautiful. We shift our schedule around based on light. We would have this is the plan, but then we were like, you know what? It's better if we did this. And I was like, so far everything was amazing. So we'll go on. We'll get the light.
Yo,
Chris Hemsworth, what are you doing?
What's up, guys?
Good.
How are you?
Good. How are
we
you?
live?
I'm good, man.
We're live. Yeah, we're right in the middle of this thing. Thanks for joining us, man.
Sick.
You got here just in time. We're a few minutes out from the oneer. The big...
fantastic! Yeah, I'm excited to see it. It was intense to shoot, and it's intense to watch.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, just a couple of questions about it before we get into it. So, when it's actually happening, we can talk about it. But how did you first start to build this scene? And what was was it always wanting to be was it planned from the very beginning?
Well, Sam and Joe you can speak to that within more detail. I was introduced to it I probably a couple of months before we started shooting. Sam said he wanted to attempt this 12-minute oneer, and I thought, oh yeah, cool, that sounds like fun. And then didn't realize it was going to be as intense and physically challenging as it was. And we just had weeks and weeks of rehearsals, and then as we were shooting each day, we'd be rehearsing the next sequence, and the next day, what was coming up. So it was kind of, everything was sort of overlapping and intense, but adds to the energy of what you see.
Yeah, it wasn't planned that way. It was one of those things where it was. I mean, again, like when I read that scene, I couldn't stop like turning the page. But it was one of those things. Just for me, it came down to like a way. How do I, tell this kind of action scene in a way that might be a little different than movie, that in genre that's come before, and they're not totally different. Oneers have been done before, and some entire movies done that way. But I want, as from a creative standpoint, grab the audience and say, you're coming with us. We're going into that. We're getting out of DACA. We're taking this kid and we're going, so that the camera then becomes a character, and you get to experience this stuff in real time. You get to be surprised when Hemsworth's surprised. You only know what as he knows it, and you see the relationship between Tyler and Obi grow during this process. And so that was the kind of creative impetus, and then the technical side, you could
There's always I find directors have sort of unique sort of wordings of kind of how they want to shoot things and make them different. And I remembered Sam saying, making the camera a character, and I thought, oh yeah, okay, whatever. And then when I saw him strapped to the front of the car and diving off the building with the stunt guys, and falling down the stairs with us and so on, I thought, wow, it really he wasn't lying, he wasn't exaggerating, he's actually doing it.
And this is where it starts. That's where you start your clocks, click, and this is where it starts, and then we're off to the. And part of
Sorry. No, go.
No, go ahead.
It was originally scripted just as a protracted action sequence. What I love from 70s thrillers, like think about the car chase from French Connection. You're immersed in pure action for a protracted period of time, and it doesn't let you go. The bank heist from Heat, any of the car chases from Ronin. So this was originally just scripted as a long action sequence. It was Sam's idea, and Sam fought for the notion of a oneer because he felt, like you said, it would be more immersive. And he committed months of his time to conceiving this and executing it. And it's exceedingly difficult. And, he put himself in harm's way in a way that very few directors would, to capture these shots on his own.
Yeah, I love all these videos. You just strap to the hood of the car, pointing the camera.
I'll point it out when it happens. And what's crazy about this, it looks like, and this like going through this gate, this shot coming up, Chris Hemsworth and Rudy in the seat were smashing through. This isn't on a green screen. They're in the vehicle, in the dust, the street, as these cars they're narrowly tuk-tuks and police cars. It's all them in the car. Like these, this is not. So that's part of the thing that's, to me, was also fun, is the realism that I wanted was part of another part of this. So here's one where I'm, on the back of a camera vehicle. Same here. This is actually one of my favorite little bits because we call it the car kung fu, just the intricate choreography.
Wow.
And I was, my lens was three feet away from some of that. Here, this shot is where I'm strapped to the hood of the car because the camera vehicle that we were using before was not able to drift these corners and get this kind of stay this close. It didn't have enough power, and it was the wheelbase, and it allowed me to get this shot where when the car stopped, they just released me. I could slide right off the hood and then kind of dive into the back of the car. So depending on the necessity of the shot, we use different tools, and sometimes I had to strap myself to the hood of a car.
So, Chris, we were talking about driving through gates and just being right there. Like, can you talk about the difference between that? Like, is it more fun, more weirdly satisfying to do stuff like that instead of like the bigger green screen CG stuff?
Oh yeah, you're completely immersed in the moment, and you're not only, you know, as the character, but you as the performer. You know, you're not having to act afraid, nervous, elevated heart rate, you know, out of breath, because you truly are. And it was intense. At the end of every take was like, whew, okay, we all survived. You know, I mean, as we're driving through the streets there's stunt performers, you know, diving out of the way as we get within a foot or two of them, and that was the most nerve-wracking stuff. Just the sort of, you know, the timing, you know, that everyone had to be in exactly the right place at the right moment. But it's certainly way more enjoyable. You know, the hardest stuff I find is green screen, you know, sound stage, just numbing lights, kind of no energy, no environment to react off and to sort of interact with. And
you mean your decade at Marvel?
I mean my entire career outside this movie. I was going to say that myself. Every time I work with Joe Russo, it's just been really boring, and he promised me something.
Zero energy, numbing lights.
What it takes then is, like, you better have a good script, you better have a good director to help you kind of get there, you better have good actors. And you know, you get there and you make Avengers, the little small film that you put together, Joe. But
good save. Good save.
Yeah, good.
So don't worry, we'll just clip out the first part of that.
Talk about how long you trained for this stuff. This fight coming up here. Like, how long would it take you guys to?
I mean, we didn't have as much time as we would have liked in rehearsal, but the moment I got there, and then it's probably 3 or 4 weeks of rehearsal, Sam, prior to that particular moment, and it was, you know, we would shoot all day long, which felt like a training session in itself. It was just you're sweating, running, fighting, jumping. In between setups, we'd be rehearsing scenes. We'd get home then and we'd have maybe 30, 40 minutes of gym work, and then we'd go and do more rehearsal. And it was the most rehearsal I've ever had. But I've got to say, I felt my body, in better condition than I've ever been in, and less banged up during this shoot than I was even on something where I did far less, you know, training or far less kind of stunts. And I think it's just because you're in the moment, you know, and it's 3 months of nonstop, but you're running on adrenaline and you don't have time to think about what hurts and, you know, what's breaking down. And I don't know, I certainly prefer to work that way after this experience, just sort of hit the ground running and don't stop, you know.
And we're getting a handful of similar questions actually from some people that are watching about your involvement in this movie from the beginning. Ivan Okafor, Walid Wajid, sorry if I'm mispronouncing those names, but questions about what attracted you to this movie in the first place. And Walid Wajid has an interesting one about action heroes. What action heroes that are kind of throwbacks, if any, did you take inspiration from for this character? Yeah.
It was the unique blend of, you know, this incredible action film and what Sam had, you know, wanted to do with it and how he wanted to shoot it, with the emotional component and this character. You know, Joe had written just such an incredible script that, you know, felt like an art house action film, which was a pretty unique combination. You know, I didn't really want to just do another action film. You know, it was pretty heavy on my history of what I'd done, and yet this felt very, very different. You know, there was a character that had a heartbreaking journey and a backstory, and something that, you know, that emotional component was throughout the whole film, and everyone each character was, you know, had their morals kind of questioned and compromised and had to make decisions that ultimately really transformed where they were headed in life. And you know, a lot of the time it's just action for the sake of action, whereas this continually informed the narrative and where the characters were emotionally. As far as films that I drew from, I think more on a sort of unconscious level. You know, I mean, I grew up, you know, Rambo, films like that I loved, and a lot of the action films of sort of the, you know, the 80s and 90s. But there wasn't anything I specifically kind of went and watched and went, oh, this is what I want to do. You know, it was I guess you could pull a million different films that, without me realizing, I'd probably stolen ideas from. But
Well, getting back into the sequence here, here comes this this knife fight with Saju.
yeah,
And just a second ago, Sam, I assume that was you that jumped off the roof holding a camera there to follow them down
I
there.
did. Yep. If those guys were going off, I was gonna follow them. You know,
I was
had to
half
think
joking about
part of
that
it
too.
was
That's great.
you'd get yourself in these situations. You're like, oh, let's just shoot on this balcony. But like, how are you gonna get down? We're like, well, obviously we got to jump. Like they got to fall, and I got to follow them. Otherwise, it won't feel real. It won't feel. So tried to keep it like we talked about before. You know, as a character. Now this night was kind of inspired by our daily interaction with the environment when we'd be scouting or just going, walking to and from our hotels, like tuk-tuks, motorbikes, just passing right by. There's an interest. There's this crazy flow. This I never saw a single traffic accident while I was there, but the flow of traffic is just amazing. And so we tried to say, what if we threw, a knife fight in the middle of all that? How would that look? And so, that's.
Yeah, I do love that the life of the street is just kind of still happening around them right up until the car gets you.
Yeah.
yeah. And a lot of it.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, you were so lucky with sort of where we shot, and even the sequence just a few minutes ago where we're running up the stairs, and then you see outside, you see the buildings. There's hundreds of people looking over the buildings and so on. You're watching us shoot. Now, in real life, they would have also been looking over, going, there was a car crash and gunshots and what's going on. Yet they were just local people just there. And so we kind of, a lot of what you see is the busyness and reality of what was going on, beyond what we could control. And again, you couldn't choreograph that kind of crowd, real crowd reaction to that scale, I think. And we got lucky.
And
I did also see
it.
it.
Payback in the form of a van. No, go ahead. That was it.
No, it's a good. You're absolutely right. We need to watch that. It's such a good out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's payback, because like Joe said, like with the rake, there's a bit of, as serious, there is a bit of tongue in cheek, like awareness. So it's like, tit for tat. Like if you hit me with a car, I'm gonna hit you with a, like there's a bit of, a bit of that back and forth going on, which we had.
Yeah, I love this moment.
It was still going here.
Yeah, because we're still in the water. But it's also, that's not face replacement. That's Chris Hemsworth and Rudy. Like they're in the car. Like they're doing this stuff, which is part I love about this sequence is how in the action the performers are. Like we weren't faking it. They're in all these environments. Like this next shot, Rudy's hanging his head outside of a speeding van. Like that's the guy. It's not on the blue screen. He's hanging his head out of the car. That's part of what really excited me about that sequence, and I think makes it unique, is a throwback to those movies that you were just doing it, and then you got out you go.
Can I ask a question,
and
Joe?
So then,
yeah.
Or just Joe or Sam, like to shoot like this, right? I mean, when it works, it's like you get that kind of sequence, right? Is the reason a big move to the green screen for a lot of things traditionally in a sequence like that would have been just logistically because of how complicated it is to do, or is it I don't know, cheaper to shoot on a green screen? It sort of feels like,
to give Sam some props here. I mean, that is incredibly complicated, and it's very complicated to map that out and to map that out over geography that extends for 12 minutes of time. It takes months, and it takes a level of experience and a know-how that very few people actually have. And Sam is one of those people, and I don't know that I could have conceived of that shot. I don't think I could have. Only Sam could have. So, as I said, it was scripted as a more traditional sequence. It was Sam's idea to conceive it as the oneer, and he put the time, the thought, and the energy into it. And worked with his team diligently for months to to craft that. It's very complicated to pull off.
Yeah.
But when done, it's very, very thrilling, as you see. Like you are, as Sam said, you become part of it. You become the hero.
Yeah.
You're feeling it on a visceral level in a way that you can't when you're not in the oneer. If you were editing that, I don't know that it would achieve that same effect, that breathlessness that you get watching it.
Well, I like the placement of it too, just right smack in the middle of the movie, and the movie itself is more or less nonstop. So
yeah,
it's
again, that was always the intent, right? Is that this is a relentless pressure cooker. We like characters who are contradictions, and what is so fascinating about Tyler is that he is physically brave, exceedingly physically brave, but he's an emotional coward, and he's done something of true emotional cowardice in his past, and he needs repentance for that. And I think that by taking a character with that, with just that simple, fulcrum in his life, that intersection of tragedy and bravery, and then putting him into the situation on a ticking clock, it's going to force him to come to terms with it in a way that he wouldn't if he were not in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
He has to make split-second decisions, and that goes down back to instinct, and he can prove to himself that he can overcome that emotional cowardice.
This is a great scene you guys have, you and Rudy have here. Can you talk? There's a question that I saw somebody leave, and I apologize to whoever left it because I lost it now. But they were wondering about if you gave any advice that you gave to Rudy, who's fairly new to acting, while you were working with him.
Sam and I worked with him a lot. And look, because he was so willing to learn and wanted to grow as an actor and soak up as much as he could. And that was just we're so fortunate. You don't get, a lot of time actors come in with their idea of what they're going to do, and that's it. Yet we just about sort of simplifying choices, and letting the sort of the actions speak louder than the words. And when we did speak, it was sort of straightforward and direct, and we weren't sort of dressing it up too much. And so yeah, we it was a lot of the work was just about just keep it simple, just say the dialogue. The writing's so beautiful and simple in the best way, so direct and short and sweet. We didn't need to sort of decorate it too much, and he was fantastic in that way, wasn't he, Sam? He was willing to learn and soak up whatever he could.
Yeah, he was a sponge. I mean, like, to see his growth as an actor and as a person over the course of the shoot was really, I got to actually turn a lot of the props around on you, Chris, for coming in, on Sunday. I remember Sundays, multiple Sundays, coming in days off, but to sit with Rudy and I around a table, and we just read through scenes, just like Chris said, stripping away any preconceived notions and just living in the moment and letting the words speak, and let that be what the impact of this is. The beauty of the writing is it's like you don't have to do much to it. Like, the situation is putting a lot of the weight on. So you just say them truthfully in that moment, and then it, I think a lot of these things landed really strongly. So hats off to the kid. He did a fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets one of the biggest laughs of the movie, truly. Like when we've seen it, like when that line about your phone, like, you're gonna leave me in the street, your phone, it's loud, like that gets a lot of great reactions. And when I've watched it with people and people have commented on.
Yeah, there are a handful of spots in there that are really well placed jokes. Was it, and in the context of a much heavier film, obviously, was it in any way a challenge to not include a few more moments to lighten it up a little bit?
I think there were more moments. We just wanted to pepper in as many as we could, to have the option to sort of lighten certain moments and so on. And a lot of the time we just take it too far. Also, the same with the sort of Australianisms, if you want to call them that, which I know a lot of people say, oh, it was really interesting to hear an Australian accent. mate, and whatever we do, and we sort of fluff around on sentences. But there were times when you do that, and then it would feel like Crocodile Dundee, and it become a bit of a cliched, experience. So we did attempt to sort of throw it in there, but it was an editing sort of balance, I think, in the end of sort of how much to have in and how much to leave out.
Kind of a little bit more of a random question for you, Chris. We got for its username is Hefaz, I think. Sorry again. What are your thoughts on cosplay? I've done a few Thor cosplays, but I'm wondering if I should make myself a Tyler Rake costume, and what are the must-haves for Tyler Rake cosplay?
Well, I mean, a rake for starters, and some military garb and attire, and get yourself a rake haircut, long on top, short on the sides and back. What else? Weapons, plenty of blood and blood, dirt, just limp around the place, grunt a lot. Say, "G'day, mate," and you'll be.
That's it.
What's interesting, what you were talking about earlier about humor, is that I think the most complicated aspect of directing is tone, and it's something very few people ever talk about or talk about enough, because tone is everything in a film. It's how you calibrate tone that can determine its success in translating to an audience, or its failure in translating to an audience. And we're of a mindset, my brother and I, and it's something that that Sam has participated in with us at Marvel, which is collect everything, take it all into the edit room with you. We have a clear idea of what it is that we want, but that doesn't mean that you won't change your mind. It doesn't mean that, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've shot a scene, left the scene and went, we absolutely crushed that scene. And then I get in the edit room and I go, God, we fucked that scene up. And you're back reshooting it. And so, you don't know what ultimately is little tweaks you're going to need for calibration. And I think that the best directors know how to capture enough footage to allow themselves to calibrate. And that's what Chris is saying. You collect those jokes, but then as we started to work on the film, as Sam started to work on the film, he discovered what he wanted the tone to be, and it works tremendously well for what the movie is.
You mentioned that's part of the strategy with the Marvel movies. Something that you picked up with the Marvel movies. There's been a handful of people have asked this as well. Kyle Steves is one on IG and YouTube. That how is working? Is there anything else that working on the Marvel films that influenced the storytelling approach on this movie?
Is that for
anybody?
Any of us? Or sure, I'll take it. Well, I mean, I had some of the best mentors in the business. I mean, Joe and Anthony direct Avengers Endgame was the highest grossing movie of all time. So they're doing so to come up under those guys, and the emphasis on storytelling, character driven, and something that I took to heart was, the best idea always wins. So that, wherever that comes from, it doesn't have to be me. Like, I may not always have the best idea. It may not be Joe. That was like the kind of the humility of that position, is like they're open to ideas from other sources, so long as it serves the movie and serves the character. So the best idea wins. And like he said, just making sure to basically cover your behind and don't have such a preconceived notion of a scene where you don't allow room for change. So just cover it. Let actors try stuff. Like Chris and I, we do a take that I liked in the moment. I thought that was right, and I say, hey, do something like Clay right now. Try something different, because hey, it might. And we had a lot of fun with that. And it and there are moments that came out of that in the movie that were right. I was wrong and whoever had a better idea, that ultimately made it into the film, and you have to be open to that and humble to other ideas that might best serve them.
This scene with this gang of kids, I really like the. Can you talk about the different approach of this fight scene with just like Rake trying to be non-lethal, essentially?
Yeah, it was many discussions about this scene, about sort of, there's the really inappropriate wrong version of it, and then there's a sort of a version where you go, okay, he's getting them out of harm's way and he's not killing them, and he's trying to also save the kid, and so you can justify sort of that what takes place. But I remember just being really nervous shooting this scene, because it's one thing to be working with stunt actors and be throwing big punches, and occasionally you clip each other, and you know, it's all right, you move on with it. This is like, you know, you accidentally don't want to hit, you know, someone who's not of the same size or not a stunt actor and kind of ready for it. And so I was just very nervous about kind of, I don't know, making sure I was missing and I had my timing right and my distance and so on. But those kids were just hilarious, weren't they, Sam? Like, I don't think any of them spoke English, and there was a translator, and they'd all just be, I don't know, they were having a great time throwing punches at me and stabbing me.
That was a wild night, man. But also one of the challenges, you know, you're working with minors is they can only shoot for like 6 hours at a time. So, you know, you're trying to get this big action sequence when they're like, you know, gotta get up for school in the morning, and be like, we still have half our day left. So a lot of it, the challenge was, you know, picking which moments to shoot with Chris and the kids, and then which stuff we could get with just Chris, like when they were home sleeping, and which stuff we had to focus on of just them if, you know, Chris came in a little later. So that the logistics was tough. But man, they brought such a positive energy to set every day. They were so thrilled to be there. That scene was amazing to shoot, man. And walking the fine line, like Chris said, you know, you're beating up kids. That's tough. So we walked, but, you know, it was always kind of written to be, I think, walk that line. And, you know, with like what, you know, Joe said, covering your butt and getting a bunch of different coverage and footage, you could develop it and really walk that line. And, you know, it tells a lot about the character too, though, which is he's not punching these kids in the face. It's like the difference between that, where he just open hand slap, which not only, you know, less lethal for the kid, but it sets up, it's humiliating. So it drives this, you know, Farhad character's story forward, which ultimately comes back in the end of the movie. So it's a very important, and how you play that action is.
Keep losing like just the last sum up. Right when you get to the good point.
The most important things he's saying.
The most important thing he's saying. We just
Well,
we'll all imagine smarter things.
It's crucial.
Here's another question for Chris, for you and Sam. I think this is coming from More Cowbell, who's on Discord. I've had a couple of colleagues call this game Call of Duty meets John Wick. How are films like this, do you think, influenced by first-person shooter games like Call of Duty? And if you are fans of those, or any video game influences that you had?
I don't really play video games, so not since I was a kid. So it was an influence for me. But you know, Sam, you could speak to sort of how you shot it, I guess, whether that was an influence. But
yeah, I mean, I think the last video game I played was. So I'm not really like a gamer, but I'm aware of how, you know, important and integral that is to like culture nowadays and kids, and a lot of people are doing it. And I did want the immersive aspect of gaming to be part of the feeling. Like, that's something about, like, I've watched people play games, which is amazing, but because you can lose yourself, and part of the reason I didn't or don't is because I will get obsessed with it, and you start playing the game, and next thing you know, 2 days have gone by, and I'm still sitting there in my pajamas. So that feeling, though, for the oner was important, to be that but then to have, you know, that kind of action nod to so many who have come before of the John Wick style was, you know, so mixing those two together, I think thanks very much for that comparison. I appreciate it.
It's great. Plus, how Duck Hunt influenced Extraction. I think
that's right. I mean, truth is, I based my character on a duck. So actually, I'm glad you picked up on that.
That's great.
Yeah, well done. Yeah.
So here, this is where we get to meet David Harbour, which I love David Harbour. Going back to Quantum of Solace, where he's got I don't know that anybody does like sleazy charm that you don't quite know what to do with better than David Harbour.
Yeah.
But what was like working with him for these couple of scenes?
Oh, it's so good. This was about halfway through, 3/4 of the way through the shoot, and you certainly fall into a rhythm, and everyone knows everyone on the crew, and especially with a film like this, you're right in each other's pockets, and then someone else comes in and a new participant, and everything's like, whoa, it changes, and everyone sort of it feels like a disruption in a really good way, and that's what David did. I found all of a sudden we sort of were forced to sort of I don't know, operate differently and adapt and as was the narrative of the story at this point in the film, there's a real shift in what's going on, and you're not always lucky that the two don't sort of you know collide like that in the best way. But he just had such an intensity to the character, and had insane sort of backstory that he built in himself, which in rehearsals going through and hearing it was like, oh wow, okay, yeah, and it just kind of fills your imagination and the sort of your gut with different ideas and different sort of angles and different opinions you might have on that character prior. But he's intense in the best way.
He so much to work with. Like, I don't know if he ever did the same take twice, but everyone was just as good as the next. It was always something. It was always a new experience. He was so in the moment and so committed to the character, and it really, it brought cool stuff out of Chris. And the way they worked off each other was really exciting. And it was a palpable energy when he was on set that worked so well for these scenes and for his character. It was like a shot in the arm for the movie. It was amazing.
Yeah, you could see he just when you see an actor who just wants to get it right, pour everything into it, not miss a beat, leave no stone unturned, and that was kind of that. There's an edge to that, where there's a sort of an absolute sort of obsessive sort of approach to things, and what if we tried this or tried this, and then I don't know, the whole scene just has like a very unsettling sort of feeling, and I found that just I don't know, we're very fortunate again in that situation to have him have that sort of approach, because you see it on the screen.
Here we're in this scene real quick. We're checking back in with Farhad, which I think this kid's journey in this movie is one of the most interesting, I think. But one of the questions that we're seeing a bunch, CK Milhorn, who's watching on IG and YouTube, has asked this. But talking about working with part of just a big ensemble cast like this, that your paths don't cross quite that much with some of these characters. So what was it like seeing this movie come together, Chris, in terms of like seeing your part of it, and then everybody else is layered on top?
It was fantastic. I obviously wasn't. I mean, I was there for some of the days that I wasn't in those scenes, but this was shot, I think, prior to me arriving, wasn't it, Sam? A lot of these moments, and you read it on the page, and you have one version in your mind of what you think it's going to be, and then you see these incredible performances, just you bringing it all to life, and you go, oh wow, this is even deeper and richer in emotion and nuance than I perceived for the first read. And again, we there's not a single cast member, I think, that didn't bring it and elevate the story to a place that we couldn't have done on our own. So I'm so thankful for all of these guys. They're fantastic.
It is truly an amazing cast, and Sam did an incredible job casting the movie. And I think another fantastic aspect of shooting it in India was getting to be able to take advantage of a really talented film base there, including cast and crew, and giving Western audiences an opportunity to see some of the best talent that India has to offer.
Another scene where we talked about this earlier, about sort of teasing out the details of Rake's backstory, and not giving them much up front. So when you talk about it, like this scene in terms of like finally putting some detail to your backstory in this scene here with Rudy, which, by the way, Rudy, like this Ovi's character being so probing here, I thought was really interesting too.
Yeah, it was. It was. He wouldn't. Rake wouldn't have talked about it unless sort of pressed in that way, and so I think it was fantastic writing. It was one of the, again, this scene I remember in the first read, getting teary eyed and it just hitting me so directly, and that very not often does that happen. It was interesting. We shot this for about 3 months, and I saw my family maybe 3 times during that whole time for the space of 2 or 3 days. Like it was, it was the first time I hadn't brought them on the road with me. Logistically, it was just too hard. And so I was certainly missing them and able to sort of use that and manipulate that, I guess. And it ended up being a really heavy couple of days. And I think at the end of this sequence, I walked off the set, and then Sam was there, and he was sort of teary-eyed, and I was sort of teary-eyed, and we're both just like, "Oh man, I'm exhausted." And he was like, "Yeah, let's try and get another angle." And Sam, we got as much coverage as we needed, but we didn't want to sort of hang around there too long. It was heavy, wasn't it, Sam?
Yeah, it was a very heavy experience, but I mean, kudos, Chris, because you went places that affected me. Like watching it, I couldn't help. He'd come back and I'd be crying each take, and it's somehow because that's an emotion. That's a very difficult thing to be that and be that raw in the moment is a very difficult thing, and to do that repeat is unbelievably difficult. So what you did in that scene, it's super powerful. It's the heart of the movie exposed, if you will. So I think getting that performance, having that moment, so much heart and connection between the two characters, I think that makes the movie what it is. Because without that, it doesn't have the same.
Yeah,
yes, those were heavy to it.
Yeah, and you talk about being exhausted at the end of this scene, and obviously the whole rest of the movie being as physically taxing as it was. Here's a question from somebody who's following along on Discord. Mouses with Z. How did you control your mental state during the filming? It must have been mentally exhausting. So, just holding up. Did you do anything specifically, any part of your routine to kind of help yourself pace yourself a little bit?
Look, other than this scene, where, as I said, it was emotionally pretty taxing and a pretty heavy scenario. It was so physically exhausting, the movie, but we were all in it together and felt like we were really achieving something pretty unique and special. And it just had that feeling. It had that buzz every time we'd complete sections of the oneer or these big action scenes of this insane choreography. We'd go, "Oh my God, wow, tick that box." And so emotionally, I was actually having a really good time. It was one of the most enjoyable shoots. And I think just because once we got on the train, we did not stop. You didn't have time to think about anything else. I'd certainly sort of limp to bed each night and kind of collapse and pass out and be pretty empty and exhausted. But emotionally, it was about sort of when on camera, just keeping it simple. Carrying the weight of this scene, remembering what the past was, making sure each scene, even in an action scene, we're still embody that feeling. But I don't know. I just loved the whole experience. So I didn't feel emotionally taxed. Really, it was a lot of fun.
Way more fun than a boring Joe Russo movie.
Way more fun than boring Joe Russo. Yeah. Much like a Joe Russo set, we're having laughs and
stale craft services.
That's right.
To touch on that scene, I mean, the whole movie is about the scene. That scene. It's and it doesn't work without that performance from Chris and from Rudy. It's the disciplined exercise of the film. It's very efficient from a storytelling standpoint, and it's about one severe revelation, and it is a tragic revelation to think about. I've got 4 kids too, and it's ultimately when I knew how to write the script was when I understood what Rake's backstory was, and I went, "Oh, that's just so hard to think about. It's so hard to think about recovering from making a decision like that." in your own life. And I understand the decision, but I don't know how one would recover from it. And that seems super complicated to drop into the middle of a hyper adrenalized action film.
Yeah, and for as much as we talked about how much the pace of this movie and how much it moves and that incredible wondering of it, for a scene where two characters are literally sitting still to be one of the most moving scenes in the film is really something.
I remember actually kind of thinking that when we were shooting, going, wow, this is such a change of pace, and how will it all stack up? But the quiet, still moments really amplify the action. They have meaning, they have purpose. It's right when you're exhausted and you can't take any more, we take a little beat, and I think it's it's just a testament to the writing again and the directing. You guys did an incredible job.
Doesn't work without the performance, buddy.
Yep.
Speaking of, I think this scene
Nobody
too
cares.
between you and Harbour is incredible, because it's as you said earlier, Harbour is charismatically amoral, and it's one of those scenes that breaks your heart because you want to love this character when he shows up, and he just disappoints you, and in the worst way possible.
And you mentioned his backstory earlier about you hadn't really it kind of surprised you a little bit, but because I'm hearing him talk about his wife, what actually reminded me of is you remember Benny, the cab driver from Total Recall? He's like, I've got 5 kids to feed.
Yeah,
I don't believe he's got a wife still. The way that he keeps throwing out the wife. So I he's such an unreliable guy here. But was that part of his work, his backstory?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that Harbour put into that. Joe and I talked about what this character, kind of who he is and where he comes from. Harbour brought a whole new level to it, insanely detailed and just eyebrow raisingly. Oh, okay, well this is I'm not going to reveal any of it. That's for him. That whatever helps him get to that moment. It was very specific, and it was powerful, and it was it translates. And I love this moment, in this scene, is one of my favorite. That because and again, to talk to the efficient storytelling and the writing. That one line of you saved my life once. Now I'm gonna. He thinks he's doing the right thing. He is the hero in this scene in his own mind, and it's unfortunately not. It's not heroic to us because we're following the. That's what makes characters so interesting, is the gray areas that they operate in, and that he is, to him, he's saving one of his good friends. And what he's saying, like Thanos, he's not necessarily wrong about facts. It's so more disappointingly immoral that you're like, dude, I can't get on board with. But his performance here is so heartbreaking.
Hey Chris, what is it like losing a fight in the middle of this movie?
I didn't lose.
Okay. Sorry.
I was lulling him into a false sense of confidence there. I had a broken arm, I guess. I'd been shot in the arm. I had a sling on. There's a few reasons why I may have, been losing, as you say.
Insinuating, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. It's good that it shows. Look, again, showing these guys having vulnerabilities and the fact that they're not unstoppable, and at any point, they're vulnerable to the same injuries that anyone else can have, and having to track those injuries too I'm so glad we did, Sam. Not wanting him to have one fight scene and then the next scene be walking normally. Like you see through the film, the limp gets more exaggerated. It's harder to lift that right arm after being shot. And so we had to kind of each scene go, okay, so which injuries happened? There's the knife wound here, the gunshot here, and it's great. It just adds a sort of, I don't know, you're limping over the finish line by the time you get to the end of the film. and tracking that continuity, I think, is really important.
Well, that's why people, I think, are responding
Yeah.
to the character is his humanity, and that he can be wounded and he can be killed, and there's real stakes there, and that is a very specific level of performance tracking that very few people do, and you did a great job with it, and conveying a human character both emotionally but physically as well.
We talked about
Speaking of,
in Die Hard. Oh, sorry, just in Die Hard, where Bruce Willis has no shoes on. That idea of like, oh, every time he's like running across the glass or something, and the whole way through, so that was the inspiration, I guess. To sort of to show how effective, the character feeling pain can be on an audience's experience.
And here, just with not much dialogue, but a pretty lengthy end to this scene. Like, it's such a just the performances that you guys gave there to sort of, you guys are sort of getting to the end of your arcs there with just a couple of words.
Yeah, Rudy was fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember it being like not realizing, and then halfway through the take going, "Holy shit, he's raised the bar here." And just he did it again like 10 times. Just would cry like that on cue, right on the line, the teardrop, and yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Here we're getting back out into DACA here, and there's been a handful of questions about the location. We talked a little bit about how cool it was to shoot in that place. But Ramon Lopez, who's watching on IGN.com, wants to know what was the most challenging part about shooting in a location that isn't familiar like DACA.
Well, I mean, one of the more challenging parts with directing a movie like this, where English isn't, there's 3 languages spoken in the film: there's English, Bengali, and Hindi, and I only speak one of them, and that not very well sometimes. So to direct in large numbers of background who through a translator, it was just like a level of time, patience that it takes to kind of just communicate what you need. Everyone's very willing and able to execute your vision. It's just that's how do you communicate. But I think Chris has mentioned before, and I have to mention again, positive and enthusiastic and wonderful all the the local people were, not only those on camera but those the communities that we would end up shooting in were so, and I think that positive energy helped carry at least me and my all the stuff we were dealing with, helped carry you through a day, just because there was so much energy.
Yeah.
Here's a question that's come up for Joe, talking about the going back to Community, specifically the paintball episode of Community, where you poking fun at big action like this, parodying stuff. What's it like to now be making that type of movie that you were parodying way back in Community?
I mean, look, it's like I said, I love these movies growing up, so there's I have a real emotional connection to them. I love watching them, and like I said, we have a very self-effacing sense of humor. We're constantly making fun of ourselves while we're trying to execute with commitment. So, but I find that compelling, and Community was just literally a study in genre. For the 3 seasons that we worked on that show, we were constantly making fun of genre while we're also trying to commit to it in a level that would be satisfactory to watch. And you go, oh, these paintball episodes are shot really cool and the action's really interesting, but the entire thing is a spoof of action at the same time. So there are elements of that we bring to a movie like this, where we will make fun of ourselves and then commit when we need to commit. And I find that just gives you a more rounded experience of a story, because you can smile at it, and then you can feel emotional, and then you can feel adrenalized, and it runs the gamut. And I always say that, look, it's the, I buy a ticket to a movie theater, I get 6 emotions. I'm getting a lot more for my money than I am if I get 2. So the more complex and rich you can make the experience for the viewer, that ultimately the more satisfying the experience.
So here we're sort of starting to head towards the finish here, and this last 20 some odd minutes of the movie is more. I mean, it feels more or less like another oneer. I mean, obviously it's not, but I mean, the energy of this movie has built and built and built to this spot, and it's just another sprint to the finish.
Yeah, I mean, this was always, Joe would always reference this freeway shootout in as the intensity and reality and kind of the investment in character, just the rawness of this final act. And so we tried to do our version of that, but not lose sight of the characters that Chris talked about, of like what they're going through emotionally and physically, so it doesn't just become I mean, it is a barrage of bullets. There's a lot of gunshots going off, but we want to make sure to track the physicality and the emotional journey of the character. That's a testament to the writing and also to the performance, because Chris was on top of it. And all these just fantastic and fully committed in a very difficult environment. Like on that exposed 12 hours a day in 40 degrees Celsius heat. It was not an easy thing to do, but they showed up every day and did some.
We got showed up every day, and then
It's always the end.
It's always the end. It's always the end.
Don't stop talking.
Now, I think what's interesting about this third act is that this is a collaborative effort on the part of several individuals to get him out. It's non-traditional in that regard, where there's just not this isn't a one-man show here, and in fact, it's Saju who breaches the bridge first, and it's Nick who ultimately takes receipt of him, and like I said, that's has a couple of critical moments in the third act to turn the movie. As well as being the one to finish off the villain. And I think that's, again, a level of reality that we're trying to play into, is that, this is not something Ray could have accomplished all by himself. I think it makes the other characters compelling and rich and unique and unexpected in the way that they're used in this third act.
Yeah, I mean that's one sort of
Here's
development
our
from
Western.
No, go ahead.
There's a Western homage to that moment before the quick draw, and then the quick draw of Saju, and then it's like one of our, because he and I spoke a lot about Sergio Leone movies and Westerns, and we had to get that in there for me and Red.
I love the full gamut of inspirations for this movie. I mean, we talked about Die Hard and Heat and Sergio Leone, City of God. We talked about it's a really broad spectrum of movies that you guys are pulling from.
Well, we're all movie geeks, I think, and it's a little bit of what the language is as a filmmaker, is that you can embrace and talk about. I went to film school, and the only reason I'm here is because other people mentored me and took a vested interest in helping me advance my career, people like Steven Soderbergh. And so I just view now this as like our ability to share with other people who want to be filmmakers. This is how we did it. We were inspired by, and everything is, as the great quote goes, it's great jazz artists don't borrow, they steal. Everything's stolen in some regard. And you're just trying to put your own spin on it and bring your own emotions to it. And your own commitment to it. So, films are a big part of our language. All of us will talk about them on set. On the Marvel films, we'll talk about it while we're working on other projects together. And it's just a way to, to create a common language amongst all of us to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish.
I do love the quick little shot as the helicopters approaching here. I'm not sure if we missed it or not. I think it's coming up, but there's a great shot of Nick with a rocket launcher in the foreground. That's just like Chekhov's rocket launcher. Like you just know she's going to do something cool with that.
Yeah. Is it coming up? I think it's coming up. But
I usually get I'm a little early on those things, but
yeah.
But I mean, in terms of building this type of extended action sequence, because this is 20 some odd minutes long. Like, I mean, how much do you think about planning stuff and paying off later?
That's very important. I mean, from the page, like that's something that here. It's coming up. I think your shot's coming up.
Oh.
I think the early one happened. Yeah, and now she's gonna actually pull it out and do something with it. It's super important to set stuff up and pay it off. Like the the helicopter early on in the movie, and like Rake's use of his gun and his forward momentum, like his fighting style changes as the movie goes, and then trying to stay true to these characters, but then show new sides of them, new tricks up their sleeves or new level, pain they're willing to endure or ideas because now this is the first time you see these guys work together. So that's a new twist. So you're not just one guy, the whole time. So you're seeing the first time there's complications. So a lot of this, conceived early on in the script phases, and we just tried to honor that and be true to the capture it. Here it comes, big shot.
Sick. I love that shot.
Yeah,
Oh, we haven't.
But see that is something kind of learned from Russo brothers and other inspirations of that explosion is one thing, just seeing it as an explosion from a bunch of different angles, but telling it like going inside the bus and telling that from the point of view of and then seeing it from Nick's point of view and of characters action happen, I think is very, very important to tell. Did you lose me again?
Just a little bit in the middle.
Yeah, we should just note that one of I thought was going to be so ridiculous, and it was actually the hardest thing to do was where I pick that guy up and swing his legs in to knock the other guy's head off. I mean, fortunately the stunt guy was quite small, so I could pick him up and swing him, and we shot that. I don't know. We did that like 10 or 12 times to me. Sam's like, nah, again. And that was the hardest workout I've ever had. But I love the shot. Every time I see the guy's head fly off to the side, it's like, that's pretty cool. I haven't seen that before.
Yeah. Well, it's great. And also one of the things I wanted to ask about that shot is did you come up with that early on and did you save it for the end of the movie? Like those sort of iconic kills like that in a film like this. Do you pace yourself? Do you plan where they're going to go?
It's very important to space your crazy kills throughout. You've got a rake kill early on. You got to have something crazy in the middle, and then we were just trying to find creative ways to take and to use dummies. That's another dummy shot. You're not going to do that to one of your buddies. So what are creative ways we could use these things to make it feel real and make people go, oh. So that was definitely something we were trying to do and planned and spaced out so that you don't get all of it up front.
I just love how that's one that I'd never seen before, and so I like the idea of just saving that one for the end of the movie.
Yeah.
I love that shot of him getting shot on the ground and crawling backwards and getting shot. It's such a painful, real sort of.
And camera right there on the ground with him too.
Yeah. He's a bull, Saju. He won't give up. I mean, he knows that his family's lives are at stake if he can't get Ovi across that bridge, and that's the tragedy to his character. he won't quit.
There was a look there earlier, Sam, before he launches onto the sequence, where he looks up at the sky and almost looks like he has a half smile, and then he goes in and the battle kicks. Like, it was that ever a discussion between the two of you about this is him sort of acknowledging this is probably my last stand or my last run?
For sure, that was, and if you watch him before he kind of does any action throughout, he has a similar like moment of buildup. Like if you go back and watch it again, like before he attacks you with the knife, he has a little bit of a nod. He always has this. We talked about it as kind of an almost Native American idea of like today is a good day to die. And before I do this, like this might be it, and we're gonna go into it 100. We did. That was very much something he and I talked about, and I love that moment while he's on.
That's cool, because I didn't know if it was just by chance or whatever, but I every time I've seen it, I'm like, oh, what is that look? It's beautiful, and it makes you kind of, oh, I don't know, that it's a vulnerability too that he has an acceptance that we haven't seen throughout the film.
Yeah.
Especially because the other thing that was struck me about his character too was like there's a lot of Terminator in him. Like even staying overnight in a dirty hotel room, looking in the mirror, trying to fix his eye, like. And just like the way that you filmed him sort of limping away from things, like he struck me as the Terminator quite a bit. And then to pepper in all of that you're talking about, like the sort of the spiritual side of him is really pretty interesting.
Well, for the first half of the film, he actually has the highest emotional stakes, right? He truly is doing this to save the lives of his wife and his son. Rake, on the other hand, is in this for money. And only over the course of the movie does he gain a connection to Ovi that has a direct sort of corollary to his past. And only as the movie unfolds does it become an opportunity for redemption for him. So it's sort of like the two characters are crossing, he and Saju, as the movie progresses.
Here we catch up to where we started. And then, like, I do really like this scene too, because like there's a second here, even though it was the first thing we saw in the movie, Rick getting shot. Like, I'm sitting here thinking Nick's got a chance to stop him before he shoots Rick. Like, there was still some really excellent tension built up in that scene.
That is again part of the simple exercise of it, right? Is that we show you at the beginning of the film that he's hit by a sniper. In a potentially fatal shot. So the whole movie you're watching to see if Rake is going to survive the film or not. And that creates tension as you're watching the film because you know where it's going.
Or so you think.
Well, good. I do want to ask you guys about the ending when we get there.
Dave, like this scene in next to the Rake's confession scene to me was the other big scene of the movie, the big moment to really pull at the heartstrings. Is this is for at this moment, at least for all intents and purposes, as you see it, it's goodbye. They don't know if they'll see each other again necessarily. So that relationship that thread that you've kind of woven throughout, this is the payoff of it. Again, both Chris, you and Rudy really brought it to this sequence, and it was effective to me watching it. Again, I was just a mess behind the monitor, crying all the time and getting excited and strapping myself to the cars. It was a really roller coaster of emotions for me.
If you weren't strapped to the hood of a speeding car, you were crying in Video Village.
Exactly. It's just up and down, up and down. I don't know.
Again, the way Rudy was just, crying in the scene on cue, and the emotion he brought, as Sam said, was another day where I was like, oh man, this kid's making us look bad. I love that shot.
It's a great
sunset,
last stand kind of shot.
Hazy background and
sun setting, so good. Come on, Tom Siegel, back. Woo!
Yeah, There's a couple of times, and he'd be waiting for the light to move sort of 6 inches left or right or whatever, and I'd be like, "Oh, who cares, mate? No one even." And then you see it, and you're like, "Oh wow, it's a masterpiece the way he shot it," and we all look so much cooler with that light having set just over here. You know, it's the small details where you're just surrounded by the best people and let them do their thing. You know.
How's that score? No, I mean, for emotional resonance, I don't know. I think, and to pay off, that's something, a little detail that I don't know how many people notice it or care, but the musical themes for each character that kind of were started early and then throughout kind of grow and develop, and then this for the Ray and O coming together.
Mm-hmm. This is Henry Jackman, who's a frequent collaborator, and this is an incredible score. It's hard. A lot of people don't appreciate what a score can do for a film. I always say that, like, when you get that finished score and it ties the thing together, that like the value of the film increases by 50%. It's incredible what music can do to create a through line and elicit emotion.
Another great moment here.
Work, getting me right in the feels. Work.
And great that the kid is in focus. That was the first time that he's in focus, right?
Yeah.
It's an old Leone trick as well from Once Upon a Time in the West. The entire film is about an image out of focus from his past that then finally comes into focus. But also the story of Farad is really compelling at the end here, that just one of the boys does him in out of sheer spite, and that the cycle of Amir will never be broken, that, even though Amir will get killed in a bathroom shortly, someone's going to step up to take his place, and then someone will take their place, and someone will take their place.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, he has no motive to kill Rake other than he was embarrassed by him.
Yeah.
Right, like he's in a way taking it upon himself to make sure that sort of cycle keeps going.
Yeah, I love the simple sort of piano through this end section.
Which was seated at the beginning.
Yeah.
When Ovi was playing the piano by himself, which was an idea Sam had.
Always know the good parts when we're doing these shows and everybody just sort of quietly watches the movie.
Yeah,
for a second.
get quiet and just
Yeah.
I'm affected emotion. Yeah. Yes. Good job. Well done.
So here we are sneaking up on the end of this movie, and obviously there's it's the very last shot of the movie.
That's what you're waiting for. You're like,
that's what we're waiting for.
Last shot.
I feel like
I was only supposed to be here for the one hour. I just couldn't take my eyes off myself.
I know, right? I appreciate you sticking around.
I just
awesome.
watching myself on camera is a truly
Speaking about watching yourselves on camera, there's a question for Sam and Chris that came up a few times in the comments. What's it like watching yourself die on camera? Is it weird?
It's a weird thing. I'm gonna say, like, I remembered I'm trying to think of it, like Rush, when he dies at many years later, and every time that the final image of the movie comes up, it always got like emotional. But I think that because it was a real guy, not that I knew the guy, but something was sort of heartbreaking about it. I don't know. It's just sort of, it's tricky. Watching yourself in general, I find, is you can be a little abrasive, but when it's done right and there's music and all sorts of thing, you kind of, it's a little easier to sort of get lost in it. But
I feel like in my, my stunt background, I've died so many times that I'm pretty immune to the effects.
What was
Sometimes
it like
3 or 4
directing-
times in one movie.
What was it like directing
Yeah.
your own death scene though? You had to do it to yourself. This
You
time.
know, I tell you what, I gained during those 3 days of being on camera, I gained a newfound respect for people like Ben Affleck or anyone who themselves. I mean, in the lead of a that to me is insane. I was just 3 days. I was like a supporting guy, and that was the hardest thing.
So there it is. That last shot that I've just been chomping at the bit to talk about this whole time. The big question is Tyler Rake dead? Did you watch
Joe
yourself die in this
Russo?
movie?
Joe Russo, what do you?
I gotta look at my contract.
I think. Look, what we love about that ending is you can interpret it any way you want to, which is really, for us, it represents hope for the boy that he's going to have a future. That is the ghost of Rake that is looking over him, and it's really what it means to him at the end of the movie, more so than what it means to the audience. And there's nothing wrong with ambiguous endings. In fact, they could be quite entertaining. And incite a lot of conversation, which I always think is, the value of a public medium like filmmaking, right? Is that, everyone can argue about it and discuss it ad nauseum, but unless there's a prequel or a sequel, the question won't be answered.
What is the immediate follow-up question? Is there going to be a prequel or a sequel? Do we know yet?
We don't know.
We don't know yet.
I'm just watching you guys react to that.
This is great.
I don't know.
Well, Chris, how did you feel about the ending?
Hang on, Joe's texting me. Joe's texting me while I'm at. It's as Joe said. I love the ambiguity there and the way you could interpret it however you like. And I really like what you said there, Joe, about the sort of where that represents that the boy is going to be okay, whether that's the, sort of the ghost of Rake watching over him or something, but it represents kind of someone still watching him and taking care of him. And I like that version. Yeah. Whether that's actually him or not, we don't know,
This would be a good question for you, Sam. Dylan McClune, who's watching on IGN, if there is a sequel, it's just hypothetically, what would you want to do more of? Would you want to go more of the route of doubling down on the action, or something more akin to like First Blood was, which is sort of more of a slow burn kind of character study?
It's all hypothetical because we got there's so many ways, so many storylines in this world that Joe built with the script. There's so many ways it could go. If anything were to happen, it's really up to finding the best story for whoever that next and what's the best thing for the movie and the universe that's kind of is growing out of this again the script that Joe wrote and kind of the movie that so I am open. I think there's so many fun possibilities. I'm ready. Just whatever the next challenge brings, I'll be there.
Great. And looking back on this whole movie, here's another question for all of you guys. This actually comes from a user named Marvel Addict, watching on IG and YouTube. What was your favorite scene in the film? Which in the finished product? Not necessarily what was your favorite scene to shoot, but what did wound up being your favorite scene?
I like the emotional scenes we talked about. I love the sort of importance of those, but I was really pleased with the opening scene in the building where I first meet Ovi and we had that fight sequence. That we took a week or so to shoot that. We went back and reshot things because Sam was like, "No, we need bigger moves and a stronger finish and so on." And so we just kind of kept shooting, and I was really happy with how that turned out.
Sam?
Yeah, for me, it was probably the kind of the second, I guess, the Harbor scene with Chris, and then with, like that moment where Rudy tragically kind of gets, caught up in that world, and actually takes. I think that something about that scene, from the moment has that drink and says, you know what he's worth, like that shift tonally for the character. I really like the way that scene played, and what we did with camera early on is very static, and then when that moment happens, we change to handheld, and then the performances from Harbour and Chris and Rudy, that was just a really powerful moment in the movie for me in the final.
And Joe, for you, since this is an idea that you've lived with for so long, is there anything from the movie that particularly stood out as something that sort of lasted from your original idea?
I mean, I love that bedroom scene between Rick and Obi. I think it's really, like I said, the whole film was built around that scene, and it's rare that you get a movie that's just about about one critical moment, and that's that the performances are exceptional in it, and it's beautifully understated, and Sam shot it and directed it beautifully, and I teared up the first time I watched it. It broke my heart thinking about a character who had that kind of trauma in his past, and in the middle of all this, crazy action. So that really, that to me is, I think, the heart of the film.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming over. We'll end it on a super easy one here, since Extraction obviously playing on Netflix right now. What else are you guys watching on Netflix?
Ozark.
A resounding Ozark.
Ozark and Outsiders. I've been watching The Outsiders. Both Jason Bateman, I think, directed. Love them both. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good question.
I've been watching a lot of kind of classic movies. Rewatched The Matrix recently. Still just rewatched The Last Samurai. Still, Zwick killing it and Cruise. Just remind myself of, like, gotta go back to all the movies I love. Rewatch the Rambo trilogy. There's only really 3 Rambo movies that we need to worry about, but you're just rewatching classic movies. So I'm delving into that.
I finally got around to watching what turned out to be the most harrowing docu-series I've ever seen, I think, which was Don't Fuck with Cats. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but
yeah, I've heard about that.
It's a tough watch.
Yeah.
All right.
Michael Jordan documentary is pretty fantastic. Well, the Chicago Bulls, documentary is incredible.
I'm full disclosure wearing a Houston Rockets T-shirt right now, and the part of that documentary where they don't talk about how Michael Jordan was just ducking the Rockets in '94 and '95. That's the real crime. But guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Chris, thanks for staying longer than just the one. And Joe and Sam, thanks for being here the whole time, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
And thanks for everybody watching at home. We'll see you next time on Watch from Home Theater.
Thanks, guys.
Good to see you, boys. Take care.